session, we're going to talk about all about dog gut health and how you can use probiotics with dogs. And for that, we have the lovely Kerrie with us. Hi, Kerrie. How are you?
Hi, Geraldine. How are you?
Good, good, good. So, yeah, I think you have a small presentation for us. So, if you want to just, start.
Okay, no problem. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, so everybody's very welcome to this talk. I'm going to discuss gut health and the use of probiotics in dogs. Obviously, my name is Kerrie Kavanagh. I work as a senior microbiologist in the Irish Equine Centre, which is based locally in Naas, County Kildare. I suppose to briefly introduce my background and what I've done and how I've ended up at this point is a million moons ago, I used to study in Kevin Street and I studied food science. When I graduated there, I worked in the food industry actually for a number of years and in quality management. And I kind of felt that's not where my interest really lay. And I decided to look elsewhere and I got a job as a lab technician in the Irish Equine Centre. So that was a good 20 plus years ago. So when I started in the Equine Centre, I worked in the microbiology lab and worked with everything from pharmaceutical industry to environmental monitoring to diagnostics in horses, dogs, cats, cows, sheep, you name it. I think we've done it. I went back to college and did a master's in food science and nutrition. And then I was promoted to lab manager. And now I run a busy INAB accredited lab. And we focus in all aspects of animal health. And we probably analyze in the guts of 40,000 samples a year. So it's extremely busy. But I suppose where I've ended up now is researching all the gut microbiome in horses and dogs and developing autogenous probiotics for each animal. So it's a unique product. I think we're probably the only company in Ireland, UK, and possibly the world that's actually doing this. So I'll explain the whole process. I'll explain how we go about doing it and how someone would go about invoking our services. And if anybody has any questions, I can certainly go through them at the end. That's no problem at all. My contact details are online there. Geraldine will also be able to issue them if there's any problem getting in contact with me. So what I'm hoping at the end of this is that everybody will have an understanding of the factors that can lead to issues with gut health, how they arise, how they happen, what can result as a situation arising from something like that, and how we can go about in repairing or even preventing these from happening in the first place. So the most important thing to get out of this is that a balanced gut microbiome will actually help to maintain good health. And dysbiosis, which is actually a term used for a shift or a fluctuation in the gut microbial populations in the gut, these can actually lead to the development of gastrointestinal disease. So we want to try and minimize these occurrences. And how do we go about doing that? Well, first of all, we need to understand why these issues arise. So there are lots of reasons why gut flora can change, but I'm going to discuss, I suppose, the leading factors and what actually happens when we go through each of these scenarios. So if we look at the first one, a change in home or environment. So this is obviously very pertinent to rescue dogs because they have a lot of upheaval in their lives and their environments can change quite quickly and at very little notice. So that can cause a lot of disturbances within the animal itself, both from a stress point of view, but also very importantly from a gut microbiome point of view. So if we look at the animal itself in its environment, you'll often find that with more than one dog in the same home, you can actually have similar microbiomes. So they can actually display the same bacterial profiles living in the same house, subjected to the same environmental conditions, such as the same people living in the environment with them, the same food, the same, routine, everything else. So when you have a change in that total routine or a change in that environment, that can really cause a disruption in the gut microbial populations. And that can actually lead to dysbiosis. So a change in those, normal, good, beneficial bacteria, and they become, impacted as a result of this change, which can lead to stress, which in itself can cause problems. So When we look at anyone changing the environment of an animal, we always recommend kind of using buffers such as probiotics, or trying to minimize the stress involved in that particular change, which obviously leads on to stress. So stress is one of the leading factors that can impact the gut microbiome. What happens with stress is that it causes changes in the gut permeability of that gut wall barrier. And what happened then is, if you have a change in permeability and you have an increase in that permeability, you can get bacteria molecules actually transversing that barrier that wouldn't normally actually occur. So what happens is, when these bacteria and their metabolites, or these different molecules, pass through that barrier, they can actually cause an immune response in that particular area that can cause a shift in the microbial populations. So when this happens, then that can change or influence this HPA pathway, which is the actual hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis pathway. And when you have a change in that, you can have a change in the animal's metabolic status. So there's a lot that can happen as a result of stress. So when we predict a stressful event, such as a change in the home, trip to the vet, going into kennels, maybe if the owner's on holidays, then we can actually minimize these impacts. So we can actually introduce probiotics or some other form of alternative treatments that can actually minimize those disturbances in the gut microbial populations. Overuse of antibiotics is probably one of the most important factors that actually affect the gut microbiome. So when we talk about antibiotics, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm not an advocate or that I'm totally against antibiotics, certainly not, because antibiotics certainly have their effective uses, and they are necessary in terms of treating chronic bacterial infections. But the overuse of antibiotics is certainly a factor that has led us to this point where we are actually having to look at alternative treatments. Because when we look at antibiotics and the constant or recurrent use of the same type of antibiotics to treat certain ailments, then what happens is we can have an increase in the resistance of that particular antibiotic, and its effectiveness then decreases over time. Antibiotics from a gut microbial point of view can cause lots of consequences. If we look at the actual nature of an antibiotic, it's antibacterial, so it will reduce the population of bacteria in the gut. It will reduce the pathogenic bacteria, so the bacteria that's actually targeted against, like Salmonella or Clostridium difficile, but it will also impact on the good beneficial bacteria in that gut that's actually there to play a specific role in digestion and immunity. So if we use antibiotics, then we can have long-lasting impacts on that gut microbiome population. And actually that has been known to last for lots of years. So it can take many years, up to 4 years actually, in some research studies, to get that structure back to pre-antibiotic treatment. So we have to be careful, and we have to think long and hard about using antibiotics, because not only do antibiotics target, as I said, the good and the bad, but they can promote fungal infections in that gut area, and they can also promote resistant bugs. So that in itself can bring more issues. So diet then, obviously a very important impact on the diet, and there's lots of dogs out there on varied diets, and I suppose the biggest division is between raw and dry. Now, if we look at diet in itself, one thing I will say about diet, if anybody is changing the diet of their animal, do it slowly, because the gut is such a sensitive area that anything done quickly or abruptly will cause massive consequences for those gut microbial populations. So if we do slowly, so if you're changing, say, from dry to raw, then you do it slowly. And I think everybody has an idea that that's the way to go. But anything new introduced into the diet of a dog, just do it nice and slow, because diet in itself can have a massive impact. Because if we look at the gut microbial populations, they're there to play a specific role. Their main role is to do with breaking down those fibers and those feed and those different molecules that come in as a result of the dog eating their dinner as such. So what happens is, when the dog ingests their food, it goes through a process known as digestion. And there's different processes that happen. But in the gut, there's different roles and functions that those bacteria have to play. So if we upset those balances of bacteria, then we will upset the digestive process, and we may result in either an overproduction of gas in that particular area. We may not get the important nutrients and supplements and all those vitamins and minerals out of those, particular components of the feed. So if we maintain the balance of the gut microbial populations, then our diet then becomes more effective. But also, if we remember that any fluctuations with that diet can impact on those microbial populations, then if we're introducing anything, introduce it slowly. And obviously, with different diets, you will see different gut microbiomes. So we will actually see a difference in the gut microbiomes of raw-fed dogs and dry-fed dogs, and different processes that result with that. Age and illness will definitely have an impact on the gut microbiome. Age in particular. So if we start out as a young pup, their gut microbiomes are relatively unstable. They're formed from the actual birthing process. So as they are birthed, they will pick up the different bacteria and, from the skin of the mother. So via the vaginal and skin microbiosis, they will start to actually colonize their own gut. So if a pup gets, say, the likes of early intervention antibiotics at this stage, if you think about how unstable those microbiomes are, and they're trying to establish dominance, so you have all the beneficial microbes that are trying to establish themselves and proliferate and grow within those particular niches, and they're unstable at the best of times, and then you treat with antibiotics, then it will obviously get rid of all the good, and it will take time for all that to reestablish. The thing with given antibiotics as well is that it can induce an antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So we can minimize these things by buffering with probiotics, because with age, with young pups or young animals, you will have an unstable microbiome, and that will become more stable over time. But then as they get older, then you'll start to see changes in diversity. So generally with gut microbiomes, the reduction in diversity, so to say the variety of microbes in the actual area itself, that reduces over time, and the animal becomes, I suppose, less able to like say, refute pathogenic bugs, or their immune status can become compromised. So we want to try and help them along and make sure that that gut microbiome has as much help as possible, because otherwise we will result in these illnesses and things like IBD and diarrhea and other such gastro problems that result as when you have a fluctuation in those gut microbiome populations. Worms. So obviously one of the big things that we see with dogs is worm burdens, and we can certainly check fecal samples for worm counts. That's very easy to do, and the turnaround is only a day. But worms can have a big impact in those gut microbial populations. And generally, the higher the burden of worms, the bigger the impact that will be on that gut microbiome. So worms actually affect this production of mucin. It's a component that will actually really help maintain the health of the gut barrier wall, and also keep everything nice and healthy. Because if you maintain the health of the gut barrier wall and reduce the opportunity of those pathogenic bugs to take hold, then you will have a much healthier animal. So with worms, we have to maintain the level. And that's really easy to check, as I said, with a worm egg count, because if you have worms and you have to treat, the actual drugs that you use to treat will also have an impact on the gut microbiome. So we have to watch that the different types of worms, because you will have different effects seen with the different species of types of worms. And then we can actually buffer those effects, and we can monitor the actual levels. And if needs be, then your vet can recommend treatment. So probiotics and their use in dogs. Well, first of all, how do we define a probiotic? Well, they can be defined as a live, non-pathogenic microorganism that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. What does that mean? So basically, a probiotic is made up of beneficial bacteria that will not harm the animal in any way. But most importantly, the numbers are there. So you have to have a viable number of bacteria present in your target destination to actually be able to exert a health benefit. What's an autogenous probiotic? And maybe none of you have even heard of this term. Well, this is defined as a solution containing live beneficial bacteria harvested from the dog's own fecal sample. A little bit different to, say, an off-the-shelf product in that the bacteria is actually taken from the animal and then formulated into a probiotic and then given back to that same animal. So if we use probiotics, or if we look at treating with probiotics, then we look at the possibility of preventing or rectifying a disease by either replacing or the missing elements or of the altered microbiome, or suppressing the overabundant or pathogenic bacteria. So in other words, we can replace what's actually missing in the gut, or we can prevent those bad bacteria coming in and actually taking hold in the gut. So our next choice is, do we pick a generic off-the-shelf probiotic, or do we go for autogenous? And I suppose that's really a case-by-case situation where we look at the dog, we see what symptoms are happening, we look at the condition, we look at the symptoms, we look at the history, and then we can determine then from that, well, what's the best, I suppose, pathway to take. And when we look at the actual gut culture itself, we can see what's missing, or we can see how the balance looks from a gut microbial point of view, and then look at picking the right probiotic to use. So a lot of you will be familiar with the term prebiotic, and they're compounds in food that induce the growth or activity of beneficial microorganisms. So really what they are is prebiotics are food for the probiotic bacteria. And often they can work in a symbiotic relationship, but there's very few out there that have been really researched and have really good results that this actually happens. But then again, there are lots out there that do work really well. So how do they work? So if we look at the actual probiotic itself, how do we know, or how do we know that the process of the actual health benefit, how do we get to that endpoint? How do they work is that they inhibit pathogen colonization in the gut. So what they do is they actually stop bad bacteria from given the opportunity to come in and take hold in the gut. And they do that in a number of different ways. They do by what's called competing. So they can actually compete with these bad bacteria and actually stop them binding to the gut wall. They can also produce what's known as metabolites, and which have antibacterial compounds that can actually kill off these bad bacteria. So as a whole, they work really well by a wall of defense, as it were. They can protect or restabilize the commensal gut bacteria. So they can actually mind the beneficial bacteria. They can protect. So where we have the situations where we have a possible stress event arising, or we know there's going to be a change in the environment, such as a change in home, we can actually protect those good beneficial microbes in the gut by actually using products such as probiotics, and they can act as a buffer and help maintain that balance. And then we can restabilize the actual populations in the gut by targeting specific families of bacteria once we know what the issue is. So once we look at the gut and see what the actual problem is, if there's an imbalance in the gut, what families are missing, what families need to be, what numbers need to be brought up, what relationships need to be rectified. So we can actually formulate a probiotic and target those specific issues. Protecting the intestinal epithelial barrier. This is one of the most important functions, actually, because that intestinal epithelial barrier is so important in protecting from this transfer of like toxic molecules or bacteria that normally wouldn't be able to transverse this wall, and keeping the status quo in that particular area. Inducing an immune response. So the gut microbiome itself and the bacteria in that gut are so important from an immune status point of view, and they actually help with the whole immune response and pathway of that. So they're really important with keeping that immune status of the animal. So when you see an imbalance in the gut, then chances are the immune status of that animal is not where it needs to be and is actually open to infections, and can actually, if your immune status is low as well, you can be more open to worm infections, bacterial infections, virus infections. So it's really important that we keep that immune status where it needs to be. Microbiome studies. Probably a lot of you have read articles and papers on microbiome studies, and there's a lot of terms out there, and some of them can be quite confusing. So if we just mention a few, that if anybody is reading anything in the future, then they'll know exactly what it means. So microbiota is actually all microorganisms in a particular environment, and that includes the bacteria, the fungi, and the viruses. The microbiome itself are all those microorganisms, their genetic material, and also their activities in that particular area. So we can have oral microbiomes, we can have skin microbiomes, we can have gut microbiomes. And one microbiome has the ability to actually influence another. So if we look at the gut microbiome, and by maintaining or improving that actual balance of microbial populations within that gut, we have a chance to positively affect other microbiomes, which is, really good. And we can use those alternative treatments to actually maintain that. Dysbiosis, as I've mentioned previous, is a shift or a disturbance in those microbial bacterial populations. And that can have a cascading impact on the immune system. So it's almost like a domino effect. If you lose one family of bacteria that are there for a specific role or function, then they will start to change. So as a result of losing that bacteria, it will start to change the environment in which they grow. If we look at the environment itself, say reductions in pH or an increase in gas production, that can change the environment for the worse and make it impossible or very difficult for the remaining beneficial bacteria to grow. And as a result, they start to die off. And then we have an increase then in this production of gas, an increase in the reduction of pH, and further problems, gas permeability issues, and then a disruption of that gut-brain axis that is so important for transporting messages from the gut to the brain. With diversity then, a lot of diseases, gastrointestinal diseases in dogs, are associated with reduced diversity in bacterial populations. So what that means is you have less diversity in the gut. So you have a reduction in variability of the actual populations that are there. And a lot of the time that can have an impact on the ability of the gut microbiome to be able to continue with its defense and keep that immune status up where it needs to be. So if we look at the digestion of the dog, and that's important if we look at the actual factors that can affect the microbiome and the whole process that's involved. Surprisingly enough, there's actually a lot of similarities between our microbiome and dogs because we share the same core microbiome. So those dominant phyla, so those dominant, classifications of family of bacteria are actually shared between species. So where you look at dog, horse, human, mice, pigeons, they can actually share similar microbiomes, the core microbiomes. So, and in the past, we've looked at microbiomes from all of those, and we have actually formulated probiotics for pigeons, goats, monkeys, horses, dogs. So, the fact that we have similar microbiomes, we can see the issues that arise across species and actually prevent using the same technologies and the same theories and thinking and actually gain those beneficial effects at the end and improve immune status. So the process of digestion within the gut is so important because it affects so many different processes within the body. If we look at the core microbiome, so those bacteria that are shared among, animal to animal, that if we look at those core microbiome and the function that it plays in digestion by breaking up those fibers, by breaking up that feed, well, through that process, they actually produce end products. And these are known as short chain fatty acids. So what these are components such as, you've probably heard of terms like butyrate or propionate. And these actually are so important from a whole body point of view because they're involved in so many different processes in the body, such as immune modulation, which we've mentioned earlier, regulation of inflammation, regulation of appetite, energy levels and energy equilibrium. maintenance of that all-important gut wall barrier and that gut-brain axis. Because if we have a balanced gut microbiome and we're producing the right amount of those end products, then these processes will all run brilliantly. But if we have an impact on that gut microbiome for any of those factors that we've seen at the very start, like stress and change in environment and worms and all those kind of things, then any or all of these processes can be affected. And as a result, we can have a dog that's showing behavioral issues such as anxiety or nervousness or just general pain or uncomfortableness in themselves. And as a result, if we look at all of those processes, by changing the gut microbiome, by actually reestablishing the issue that has occurred, by fixing that or repairing that, then as a result, we will fix these processes too. So why are we here, and why is my work, I suppose, as a PhD candidate come to this area? After 20 years in this type of environment or in this industry, I've seen probably everything and all species that have come to this point. And a lot of the time we look at what's happened in the past, the case history and what's gone on and what's the diagnosis, and are we really seeing the full picture? So you might end up with a diagnosis and a treatment, but is this really the full picture? Or is there something underlying that? Are we looking in the right area? So as we know, the gut microbiome affects so many different processes in the body. And maybe we're seeing symptoms in a different area of the body, and we're thinking that that's the actual issue, when in fact our root cause or true cause is actually the gut microbial population itself and the imbalance that's there. And maybe if we look at the current treatments that are being used as a result of that diagnosis, well, maybe they're no longer effective, or maybe they're not the right course, or maybe they're not essential. So this forces us to look at alternative ways or treatments or opportunities that we can use to actually maintain that health or prevent that issue from occurring in the first place. So the big question is, do we test or treat? And our recommendation is always test if possible before you treat. So if you're heading to the vet with your dog and it's suffering from chronic diarrhea, if you can get a sample at all, get it before you get to the vet, because a lot of the time the animal can be in dire need of some kind of emergency treatment, and that may be antibiotic treatment. So if a dog is given antibiotics, then we as a lab, if we are given the sample after the antibiotic treatment, then we may not see the true picture, because antibiotics, as we know, are antibacterial agents. They will certainly target the bad or the pathogenic bacteria, but they will also target the good bacteria. So we may not see what's really happening with that particular animal because the antibiotics have masked, that particular picture. So we would always say test first, if at all possible, and then treat. Or if the dog has been treated already, but we've had the sample before treatment has been given, then great, because we can advise then if the current treatment is not working, well, then we can show this may be a better treatment, whatever the case may be. The use of antibiotics in dogs, and I suppose this is a big factor and the reason that a lot of the time we see problems in dogs and gut imbalances, because the use of antibiotics is and it doesn't just go for dogs, it goes across the animal species. But I think the whole global awareness now of antibiotics and prudent use of antibiotics has really taken effect and is starting to change people's minds, that antibiotics aren't the first go-to that we should be looking at. Yes, absolutely, in certain situations we have no choice, and that's absolutely fine. But there are alternative treatments that we can look at. And if we look at, the effect of the antibiotic on the actual gut microbiome and that lasting consequences, particularly for younger animals, then perhaps we can start to realize that there are other alternatives out there. And even looking at this graph, so the percentage increase in MIC values probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but basically what the MIC means is the minimum inhibitory concentration. So it's a minimum amount of antibiotic that we actually need to exert an effect against the particular diagnosis in that animal. But what is happening is over time, we're seeing those MIC values actually increase, which means that you need more of the antibiotic to actually get that desired effect at the end. All this will do will actually lead us to a road where we're given less and less decisions or opportunities available to actually treat the animals. So we need to start looking at alternative treatments or preventing the issue from happening in the first place. Alternative treatments then, such as probiotics. There's lots of alternative treatments available, but definitely from, I suppose, a microbiologist point of view and witnessing the impacts and the consequences of those imbalances in the gut and actually being able to repair or fix those issues using good bacteria. So all bacteria is not bad. Bacteria actually have good roles to play within the body, and we can really see it in the gut microbiome because they play such an important role in maintaining the health of that animal. So if we look at protecting that bacteria or even re-establishing those bacteria that are lost by simply giving a probiotic, well then, that's a really good way to actually maintain that health or re-establish the health of that animal. And there are lots of probiotics on the market. And the thing that I would say about probiotic is look at the labels. If you're picking up a probiotic, there's lots of probiotics out there on the market. Look at the label, read the ingredients. If you pick up a probiotic and it says contains probiotic strains, and it doesn't mention what the strains are or doesn't mention the concentration of the numbers of probiotics, and it mentions a whole load of other ingredients, well then, look into see what research has been done on that probiotic, talk maybe to anybody that has used it and see if that actually is the best probiotic to be using, because there's lots of probiotics out there that contain either one strain, multi-strain. You can have probiotics that actually use probiotic bacterial strains or even fungal strains. So there's lots of research out there that will show that the incidence, say, of IBD in dogs or chronic diarrhea can actually be improved or even stopped by the use of antibiotics, because it's all about changing the bacterial population. So if you have diarrhea that's been caused by a pathogenic bacteria such as Salmonella, MRSA, or Clostridium difficile, then if you can come in with this probiotic and almost flush that bad bacteria out and re-establish the balance of the good bacteria in the gut, you can actually prevent that problem from happening again. And then as a result, then it makes sense that you would see a reduction in those symptoms of diarrhea. How do we make an autogenous probiotic? So where do we start? We start with a fresh fecal sample. So the fecal sample itself is really a good point to start because it can really give us a good picture of what's happening in the gut from a gut microbial point of view, from a worm or parasitic point of view, and also see if there's any bad bacteria floating around, like Salmonella, like Clostridium difficile, because Clostridium difficile in humans is a massive problem. And what's happening is antibiotics are becoming less effective against Clostridium difficile, but we are also seeing those same human trends being reflected in the animal world. So it's so important that we start to look elsewhere for being able to maintain that health. So fresh fecal sample, really easy to take. As long the freshness of the sample really makes a difference, because time to test is important. The longer or the older the sample is, then we may see certain families of bacteria dying off. So we may not see the true picture of what's going on. So taking a fecal sample is like taking a snapshot of time, seeing what's happening in those gut microbial populations. So when we get it into the lab, then we'll analyze it on the day that we receive it, and we'll set it up using different media and broths, and we'll have a look at the bacteria that's present. From looking at the bacteria that's present, we can see if there's actually an imbalance or not, as the case may be. So just say, for example, the gut flora is not in balance, then we will target specific bacteria in that sample, and we will check it for resistant genes. So the thing about the gut microbiome, that particular area, is probably 25 times more likely for resistant genes to actually transfer. Because if you think about the amount of bacteria that's in the gut, you're talking billions and billions of bacteria. They're all in such close proximity. So the ability to transfer those resistant genes is really high and higher. That's why it's higher there than any other part of the body. So we want to make sure that we check for all those resistant genes. And when we formulate a probiotic, that we use the most beneficial and the safest bacteria. So once we have the bacteria targeted and isolated, we'll start the harvesting process. Because if you remember the definition of a probiotic, it's all about the adequate numbers. And harvesting is such an important step in actually formulating that probiotic. So then what you get at the end of it is a preparation of probiotic that's unique to your dog, that contains the beneficial bacteria isolated from their very own fecal sample. But also we will store the bacteria. So if we look at the actual fecal sample and we say the gut flora is not in balance, well, then that's still a good finding, because a lot of the times finding the proper diagnosis can be a process of elimination. So if you find that the gut flora is not in balance, then you look to the next possible, thing that it could be. If the gut flora is not in balance, then we will still store the beneficial bacteria that we isolated from that dog sample, and that's stored for the rest of their life. And that's really important from a safety net point of view, because even though I've spoken a lot about antibiotics, we've seen firsthand the consequences. And sometimes when I get samples in here from dogs and they're looking to get the probiotic made up, or they're looking to establish, what's actually happening in the dog's gut, we can tell, yes, there's an imbalance, but unfortunately we can't work with anything there, because either A, it's not there to begin with, or B, it's too resistant for us to work with. So when we get the good beneficial bacteria, we store it. And that means then in the event of future, detrimental events, like such as a dog gets a wound and has to be treated with antibiotics, or whatever the case may be, then it doesn't matter if we can't find the bacteria at that particular moment in time, because we have it stored. And that's a brilliant safety net to have. And really, really good that even if you send in a fecal sample and even if the dog's gut is in balance, then you still have that safety net. And that's there available to everybody. And it's very easy to do. So if we look at how we've talked about the factors that affect the gut microbiome, we've talked about how they impact the different processes in the body. We've talked about alternative treatments that can be used. Why would we use them? But let's really talk about the nitty gritty and how this actually works for a particular dog. This particular dog was taken in by a rescue society called Dogs in Distress. And this lovely dog is called Cairo, and obviously is a Dalmatian. And Cairo went through every test possible, and had blood tests and had biochemical tests, and you name it, had every test done. And Marie Hannon from Dogs in Distress gave me a call and asked me my advice. And the first thing I said was, have you checked the gut at all for the bacterial populations? And she said no. And I said, okay, send me a fecal sample and let's see what we get out of it. So from looking at the fecal sample, we were able to determine that Cairo's gut was not in balance from a bacterial point of view. We were able to formulate a probiotic specific for Cairo, and then Cairo got the probiotic over a course of 3 weeks. And the before photo was on the left. So Cairo had an issue with being able to put on weight. And as a result, they were a little bit reluctant to home Cairo, because they wanted to make sure that the health status was as good as it could possibly be. The photo on the right is taken 1 month post-treatment. So Cairo's body condition was a lot better. He was a nice, healthy weight. Form had improved, and overall, everybody was happy. So we can see there that even though you can be given the best of food, you can be given the best of supplements, that if those gut microbial populations aren't in balance to begin with, then you will not get the important nutrients and minerals and all those important products out of that feed to be able to furnace all those important processes within the body, to get those important end products that actually keep that dog healthy and in good form. So it's really important that it's great that a simple test can show issues like this, that we can actually prevent or even repair these issues by simply giving a natural product that only contains sterile water and the bacteria taken from that particular animal. So it was a really good outcome, and that's the whole point of us being here. That we start with looking at the health of the animal and seeing how we can fix it, and helping to prevent those issues happening in future. And that's the probiotic. So thanks for listening, and I'll take any questions. And just to note, they're my two there, and they've both been on the probiotic. The guy on the right is a miniature dachshund, and his name is Zeb. When I got him, he was in a pretty bad state. He had giardia, he had worms, he had chronic ear infections. His coat wasn't great, and he was a skinny little thing. So obviously, being in the position I'm in, I was able to check his fecal sample. I was able to establish that he had the giardia, and that his gut flora was pretty bad, to say the least. So I was able to formulate the probiotic, and he hasn't looked back since. So I wouldn't be here if I hadn't used it on my own dogs, and know that it's a way that we can certainly fix problems, and 100% natural. So I think given the current trend of the global pandemic with resistance and antibiotics and things, it's so important that we actually look further afield. And although I'm here to talk about probiotics because that's what my area of research is, there's lots of alternative treatments out there. There's lots of treatments out there that can be used to rectify those issues in the gut. But certainly probiotics, from my point of view, are great. So I suppose, Geraldine, if you want to start the...
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you. It was just fascinating, really, and so great. You should have received the sample from Charlie as well.
Oh yes, I did actually. Yeah, I meant to look at the results before I came on here. I'll do that and get on to you for sure. Okay. But hopefully we'll be able to formulate a probiotic, and you can see the changes themselves.
Now, if you have more questions, post them in the chat. We have one that's from when you were talking about the diet and changing the diet. Mm-hmm. So when you say introduce diet, change slowly, what do you have in mind, over days or weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. And really this depends on the dog. Dogs are very like humans in this kind of situation, because, we suffer the same ailments almost as dogs can, and horses can, all the rest, like depression and anxiety and nervousness and all these different things. So when we're introducing different diets, we want to minimize the impact on the gut microbiome. And anything to do with the gut works best when done slowly. And I suppose that term slowly can be defined as, I suppose, if you do it day by day, so you can do a gradual increase in this. So say if you're changing, say dry feed, and you're changing from 1 mg to another, that you start with, say, your average food, and you introduce, even 1 or 2 nuts gradually each day till you're at the stage where that meal now is all of the new nuts. Some animals can tolerate that quicker change in diet more than others. So if you have a dog that's particularly sensitive, or has a lot of allergies or intolerances, then the slower you introduce that change in diet, the better. If you have a dog that's quite healthy and robust and really is not fazed by much, well, then you can actually introduce that diet change a little bit quicker. So I suppose the answer to that really depends on the dog, but also the slower the better is really the way to go with that. And if you find that you're introducing a different diet and you get things like diarrhea or something like that, pull back a little bit and go slower with the change from one, feed to another. And pull back. You can also use things like probiotics and like that to act as a buffer, so that if the diet change is causing a change in those bacterial populations, that you can actually buffer it, so you can protect the beneficial bacteria and those influences, say, that change in diet can have. And that can actually make the changeover a lot easier.
Yeah, because I think in that case, it's probably, I don't know, I think, and it's to go from probably dry to raw. So it's kind of like a massive change as well.
Yeah, it is a massive change. Yeah, and absolutely they can tolerate it. But again, it's about that dog and how they react to, I suppose, outside influences. And, like I said, if you have a sensitive or nervous dog, they tend to have bigger impacts on their gut microbial populations. It's exactly like humans. And, if someone is relatively kind of good at, say, how they are in stressful environments, they will probably have a more stable microbiome than the person who would maybe deal with stress a bit different. It's the same in animals. They deal with stress differently, and the owner actually is the best person to actually see that in the animal. So if they see that it is quite a sensitive dog, then do it slowly, really slowly, day by day, nut by nut even. It depends on the dog, as I said. But if there are any symptoms like diarrhea, then pull it back and go really slow then from then on.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Okay, so we have another one. Sorry, I joined late. I need to watch your discussion back later. But my dog is just been diagnosed with, okay, I don't know, Giardia. Do you know what that is? No,
yeah, it's a parasite, yeah.
Other course of Panacure. I'm interested in a recommendation for probiotics or other ways to support its gut through recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So Giardia is a particularly nasty parasite. It's a single cell parasite. So it's not really a worm in a sense. It's found in environments such as water, contaminated water. And unfortunately, it's really easy to spread from one animal to another. So if you have Giardia in one dog, chances are your other dog will get it. And a lot of the time, once the diagnosis of Giardia has been passed to the vet, because these type of tests can only be done through a vet. There are certain tests that the lab can do direct for owners, but where treatment is required, say with the likes of Panacure or antibiotics, then that has to go through the vet. So Giardia can be treated by lots of different things. For foremost, it has to be treated by either antibiotics or like that Panacure. But what I would suggest is if you are treating for Giardia, make sure you're giving your dog a probiotic at the same time, because all these drugs can have an impact on the gut microbial populations. And again, it's all about minimizing those influences, minimizing those disturbances or changes in those populations. So if we can do that by simply adding a probiotic, well then great, why not do it? So go in with the probiotic. Listen to the advice of your vet, because your vet will obviously be the most important person here with regards to treatment. They will advise you on that. But with the treatment of Giardia, give a probiotic, and chances are to actually maintain that treatment even 3 to 4 weeks after the treatment for the Giardia has ceased.
Okay. So that's the answer to the previous question. Yes, it would be that dry to raw change. Fortunately, my scamp of a dog is very healthy, but your comments are very helpful. Okay.
Yeah, well, I also have a scamp of a dog, so I understand who had the Giardia, by the way.
Oh God, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
My dogs are fortunate enough to never have had it, because that's why I never heard of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's that was Emma with the Giardia. Wonderful, thank you so much. So, if you have any other questions, just type them in, and we can help you more.
Yeah, and if people are don't want to ask a question here, they can certainly send the question to you, Geraldine, or email me directly. That's no problem at all. I'm certainly happy if anybody wants to email or phone me and talk about their particular case. That's no problem. So Geraldine has all my contact details. If anybody wants to get in contact, that's no problem.
And I will send that to you by email probably tomorrow. And you send as well, you have a great FAQ as well that I will send to people, because I'm sure it will really help. So you get all that tomorrow.
No problem.
Tonight.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the message that we want to get across as well, is that we are a lab that is quite friendly, and that we offer advice, and we offer that follow-up customer advice that when you get the report, you can pick up the phone and talk to me, and we can certainly advise as to what probiotic or what the gut microbiome looks like. So and I suppose that can be peace of mind for people too, because when you get a report and you don't understand it, that in itself can be a little bit frightening. So I would always say that when you get the report, ring me. I can go through everything. I can go through the results and explain and advise then on what the next step to take is.
Do you want to, I don't know if there's no more question, do you have the results of Charlie there? Do you want to do a case? I don't know.
No, I don't actually have the book here with me, but that's something that you can share for sure with everybody afterwards. We can certainly go through the gut microbiome results, and if it is a thing that we recommend the probiotic, we can certainly share all that, no problem at all.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if there's any, okay, we'll wait 2 more minutes. Last chance for questions.
People are probably afraid.
And then we let the lovely Kerrie go, because I'm sure she is. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm drinking lots of coffee, so I'm okay.
Oh my God, it's too late for coffee.
Not at all.
Okay, I couldn't drink coffee. I'm only drinking tea, because if I drink coffee now, I'll be up all night.
Yeah, I hope people got something out of it anyway. Like, I mean, even an understanding of the factors that can actually affect the gut microbiome and what can happen as a result of that, and then how to fix it. And there is hope you can fix it. So that's a good thing to kind of take out of it. And also that the same sample can be checked for things like the gut flora check. It can be checked for a worm egg count. It can be checked for lungworm, fluke if you're in a particular wet agricultural area. Fluke can be an issue there. So I mean, there's lots of tests that we can actually offer direct to owners, and then the vets themselves can send in samples that we can check for the pathogenic bacteria such as Salmonella and Clostridium difficile, and any resistant bacteria like MRSA or vancomycin resistant enterococci, which can be big in the gut. So there's lots of I suppose bacteria that we can identify and rule out, as the case may be, or recommend treatment to the vet, as the case may be. But always, if you do use or have to use antibiotics, and I said that can be essential at times, to use the probiotic at the same time, because it will act as a buffer and it will help minimize that influence on the gut microbiome. So that those type of things are easy to put in place, and will result in a much better effect in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question. You may have said this already, but should we be doing a periodic check even if our dog is healthy? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, no. Well, actually, if your dog is healthy, that's really a good time to actually target the good beneficial bacteria and put it into storage. Because a lot of the time we get the dogs that are quite ill or have chronic diarrhea and have already been treated with antibiotics, because they're it's an emergency situation, and that's obviously necessary. So when we culture the sample at that stage, a lot of the time we hit that wall. We don't have anything to work with. And that's really why we came up with the idea of that safety net of storing the beneficial bacteria when we could. And there's no time limit on that. So, you can do a gut flora check now, store the bacteria now, and then in, say, a year's time or 2 years' time, if you hit a bump on the road, then you can certainly ring us and say, do you know what, actually, we need the probiotic now. So it's a brilliant way to store the bacteria. And I don't think there's anybody actually doing that. So, and it's really easy to do. It's all by the fecal sample. Very easy to take it, very easy to send it to us. And then we'll have the results back in it takes about 3 days for us to see if there's an imbalance in the gut. And then once we target the bacteria, that's in storage for the rest of their life. So, and obviously with the worms, it's really good to check them periodically, because the life cycle of a worm is the whole parasitology area is really not black and white. And with the life cycle of the worm, it has a migrating larvae stage, which sometimes when we get the fecal sample in and we look down the microscope, we're looking for eggs and we don't see that stage. So you might get a negative result because we're not seeing any eggs, but you may well see worms in the actual feces itself. So it's really important with the side of worming and all that type of thing that, test. You can certainly test to see if the dog has worms, and if they don't, great. And if they do, then we'll identify the type of worm. So you'll know exactly what species of worm you're dealing with, and then the vet can pick the product accordingly. But certainly with worms, if you do a periodic check, say every twice a year or 4 times a year, then if there are any kind of blips in that trend, you'll see them. You'll get an overall picture of the actual worm, say, burden in your dog over time.
Okay. Could you maybe give an idea of the price that it costs, like to have the
Yeah, sure. Our worm egg count is €15 plus VAT and same day turnaround. Our fluke and lungworm is €18 plus VAT, and lungworm was not set up at the weekend because it's an overnight technique. So I'd also advise, if anybody's sending in a fecal sample, do it at the start of the week. That way, then it's we have the chance to store the bacteria, get talking to you about the whole gut flora check, how it looks, and then things like lungworm are an overnight technique. So we would have all the results to you, say, by the end of the week. So definitely at the start. The gut flora check itself is, I think, 62 plus VAT. So really, when you think about it, with the storage of the bacteria, it's not that expensive. The formulation of the probiotic, I suppose, where our expertise and work is involved, because you have only certain people that are actually trained to pick out these particular bacteria. There's a lot of work that goes on in the background. So the report is actually quite simple, but we check for resistant genes and resistant bacteria. We also analyze and see what's missing, because a lot of the time you can actually have a section or a family or classification of bacteria that's missing, and that in itself can tell a tale. You can also have dogs coming in with overgrowth of yeast in their fecal sample, and straight away we know there's an issue in the gut, because once you have an overgrowth of yeast, you know that the environment is not good in that gut. But you can reestablish that environment back to being nice and healthy again by literally introducing the good bacteria. So there's lots of things that you can see from those tests.
Now, another question from Mary. Hi, Mary. Would you give the probiotic at the same time as the antibiotic, or wait until you finish one and start the next?
No, definitely give it at the same time, because, as I said, it's such an important buffer. It will help minimize the impact of the antibiotic in the gut, and it will keep, because the antibiotic is targeted against the bad bacteria, which is the pathogenic bacteria, like Salmonella, like Clostridium difficile. So it will target those bad bacteria, but it will also target the good bacteria, and you want to prevent all those good beneficial bacteria that play such an important role in that gut from dying off. So absolutely use a probiotic at the same time, and even after the treatment has finished.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm just checking if there's any other one. I cannot see any. I'm just checking last time. No, I don't see any. No more question. Well, if you have more, I can forward them to you.
No problem at all.
If you watch on replay, you can still post the question in the comments, and I will forward them to Kerrie. And and that will send the contact Kerrie as well tomorrow, and the wonderful PDF. And thank you so much, Kerrie.
No problem. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, and stay tuned. In 1 hour, we'll be back for the canine body language. You don't want to miss that, because this is very, very, very important. I'll see you then. Bye.